correlation between mental disorders and childhood trauma and or environmental stressors. I've chosen this topic because it's a little bit close to home. I do feel like people are familiar with mental disorders, but not necessarily how they arise, where they come from. This can also play a factor into our speech, language, behavioral, and emotional cortexes and how we function in our day-to-day society. So the first thing I wanted to mention or state was the American Speak Language and Hearing Association is one of the primary foundations for addressing symptoms, disorders that can be related to mental health, birth defects, anything that functions around that processing system. They build filters to help with our cognitive processing, thinking, behavior, our speech, our language, which are in fact two different things. One of these being Dr. Shipon Bloom, part of the social communication anxiety treatment. From her years of studying and research, she picks individuals to study their biological mechanics, as well as their effects from these mental and emotional stressors. One of my big points within my speech that I have done today is to focus on the neurological approach that has to deal with how our processing system goes, that being the limbic, hypothalamic, pituitary, adrenal axis. After we're born, there's about 2 weeks where our mind and neurons are completely fallible. We take on any kind of stress, trauma, environment, whether it be good or bad. That's how we learn to develop our reaction and where we process from there on. Dr. Vasquez has spent majority of his research learning on that vulnerability without excessively putting an infant into a stressing situation under a microscope. This is where he has found that irregular cortisol regulation can throw off our cognitive functioning. Again, cognitive being our behavior, our language, our speech, which in turn affects our adulthood. I continue on to found that Carol Westby, she goes at it from a bit of an older angle to inform everybody that life's not stress-free. We do have times where we will have encounters that we can't always avoid, this being what we're born into, what goes on around us, things that may or may not be happening at home. She records and processes how to cope with things such as a high blood pressure, hormones, heart rate. Any of these things can elevate our natural equilibrium, thus sending us into a stressed environment and in result affecting how we talk to each other, how we think about things, how we behave in certain environments. So to continue on, McLaughlin and Sheridan, they study the deprivation. So say you're put in a good environment with a healthy upbringing, there are also situations for kids that don't have such access to food or a sleeping arrangement. They can live in a deprived environment. So stress is not necessarily the story of hearing someone hurting their kids at home or not having a mom or dad around. There are environmental stressors that can push us into these imbalances in our systems. The 2009 National Research Council and Institute of Medicine reports and gives careful detail on the individual and risk factors that actually affect our MEB, which is our mental, emotional, and behavioral development. This can go for adolescents, children, adults. I did say that within our first 2 weeks of being born, we're the most fallible, but as human beings and adaptive creatures, we're constantly picking up new information for how we associate with other beings. So on that of the biological and environmental influences, they typically focus on an individual and specific. This is a very hard topic to surveillance and research, because everybody is different, everybody has their own situations. So with that council, they kind of focus more on an individual to help an individual treatment plan, rather than clumping a society or a group of people into a observation. So for my speech in total, out of the 3 topics I hit, being the neurological, the different styles of adaptation, just to restate those, there are 10 different of them. I didn't exactly want to list those out for you guys today, but they are to encompass our speech, our language, our behavior, emotional. Those are the more that you hear frequently about. And then thirdly, us being predisposed to these kinds of things. As an individual who has learned and experienced struggling with a mental disorder, not necessarily because of how I was brought up, but because I was biologically predisposed to something like this, I think it needs to be more taught in schools or acknowledged by society, so that not only do people learn, but they can also adapt and help improve themselves, and move forward with a better, cohesive and communicating society. Do we have any questions? Anything you want to ask?
So if you're exposed to it at a certain age, does it have a different effect, or is it just kind of the same across the board?
So it's a little more effective when you are a child, because of your, I like to call it your gooey mind. You are essentially like clay when you're a baby, not because your bones haven't hardened off yet, but because everything you take in and everything you do and see and touch and feel, that's building your mind and your characteristics and your systems and your cognitive approaches. So we'll say you do form a little more of that when you're an infant, but we are an adaptive human being and creature, so we are constantly taking in new information and improving ourselves. So thanks guys, have a good day.